Welcome back to more Warhammer lore. In today's video we will be delving into the ever-lovable Skaven once again, more specifically Clan Skryre, which is one of the 4 great Skaven clans that specializes in the horrible combination of arcane sorcery with mad science and engineering in a boundless pursuit to create some of the greatest and most diabolical war machines to have ever graced the tunnels of the great Under Empire. Its members, known as Warlock engineers, are both inventors and magicians alike, whose expertise aid in the manufacturing of all kinds of war machines and weaponry for the use of the willing to pay. Many of them are full-fledged wizards themselves, capable of manipulating the winds of magic to cast spells on their own, but their most potent of weapons lies in their use of their own deadly weaponry. Now, this is not exactly full-fledged sorcery, because it usually requires some kind of mechanical catalyst, usually involving warpstone, though this is not to discredit it as true magic, because in the Warhammer world, if you believe something enough, and enough people, or in this case, ratmen, believe it as well, it is possible that it will actually happen, regardless of if it should happen through like physics and reality. So even though usually the Warlock engineers casting the quote-unquote magic believe it is a product of some bizarre scientific invention they came up with, it could in fact just be the good old-fashioned chaos energy. From their Warpforge workshops underneath the great swampland capital of Skavenblight, these Tinker Rats have produced a vast arsenal of terrifying weapons in their long and glorious history, which includes the invention of the deadly poisoned wind, the Warpfire thrower, and the Warplock jezzail. Clan Skryre is thought by many as arguably the most influential and powerful of the great clans, due to their clan having the largest arsenal of weapons in the entire Under Empire, that can rival that of any other human nation in the world. The clan is also fairly wealthy from their exploits of renting out their powerful machines and special expertise to the highest bidder, being almost as rich as their rivals in Clan Mulder. Clan Skryre holds a sway in Skavenblight, a teeming Skaven metropolis considered by many to be the capital of the Under Empire. Access to the city's plentiful veins of warpstone allows the clan to expand upon the technologies for which they are renowned. The city reflects the nature of its Skryre masters, being atypically modern when compared to most other Skaven settlements. Without a doubt, Skryre is the wealthiest and most powerful of all the great clans. The clan's strength rests on artifice and sorcery in equal measures. Much of their technology is geared towards war, mixing equal amounts of magic and warpstone to create weapons unparalleled anywhere in the old world. Fortunately for Clan Skryre's foes, their weapons are often as dangerous to the Skaven as they are to their targets, prone to, let's just say, gross malfunctions, usually ranging from the weapon simply not working, but also to it either exploding and killing its user and any nearby friendlies, or simply losing control of said weapon and hosing down ratkin with Warpfire or Warpstone bullets. Because weapons are Skryre's stock and trade, the clan's other mechanical feats are easily overlooked. Skryre succeeded in creating many exciting devices, from the warp rail that connects one end of the Under Empire to the other, to the Far Squeaker, a device allowing instant communication between Skaven over great distances. Indeed, much of the Under Empire's mining is accomplished by way of Skryre manufactured earth movers and rock drills. The warp rail is not quite a train, it's more like a over-glorified mining cart system. It's not too fancy, mostly propelled with the use of warpstone and steam and, of course, slaves. There's always slaves. Now, the Far Squeaker is a much more interesting invention in that it does allow instant communication across the Empire, but it is not perfect, which will be the theme of most of Clan Skryre's inventions. It acts more like an old World War I era telephone, with all the static and gargling noises that go with it. Of course, it works just enough to allow communication, but either because of the way the Skaven speak, or simply due to the fact that all Skaven constantly try to backstab one another, orders are often lost or misinterpreted for the receiving Skaven's benefit. Now, the Earth Movers are another story completely, as these massive machines literally can dig through almost anything and create massive tunnels. They do this through an application of warpstone that they kind of compress into almost like an acid at the tip. I would kind of call it like that. Now, for this reason, they can far exceed what slaves can normally produce as far as digging is concerned, and it even surpasses the great burrowing beasts of Clan Moulder, as it never tires as long as the engineers can keep it running, that is. It is of note that most, if not all, of Clan Skryre's inventions run off of Warpstone, and so anything that can remove or contain chaos energy can essentially make the majority of their weapons just completely useless. This is one of the reasons that Athel-Loren has not been penetrated, as the Elven Waystones are capable of preventing magic from crossing their barriers, and this is what they use to hold in the tree men, like in the Wildwood section, where they basically like tree men prison. And since they're chaotic beings, they can't cross the barriers. And for this reason, the Warpstone, which fuels the great machines, will be expelled of all its energy, and the machine will go no further if it comes in contact with or even or near any of these Waystones. And so that's one of the many reasons why they're held out of Athel-Loren. The clan's Warlock engineers are constantly researching new technologies. Skryre's experiments are just as likely to succeed as they are to fail, however often with catastrophic results. The Warlock engineers feel that such failures are to be expected, especially those riding on the cutting edge of technology, the only place any Warlock engineer should be. The number of laborers, mechanics, and engineers as well that die as a result of this research is completely irrelevant when compared to the value of a single successful experiment. Now, a good example of this is in the past in the Skaven's history, a great catastrophe happened, and this may have been before the rise of Clan Skryre officially, but one would assume it was a Skaven which held their values of this clan that long ago built a great machine which was powered with Warpstone in hopes of digging vast tunnels and essentially creating what is now today the Under Empire. Now back then, this is very early in Skaven history, Skaven Blight was actually partially above ground, but when the machine inevitably exploded and killed a very sizable portion of the Skaven population, the city sunk into the earth. The machine, though obviously had some kinks that needed to be worked out, did in fact actually somewhat work, in that it punched a hole into the Dwarven Underway and started what would be considered the Great Migration of the Skaven across the globe. This is just one of many accidents from what I believe to be the predecessors of Clan Skryre, and you can see that the apple has not fallen very far from the tree, though it is hard to argue with their results despite the casualties their experiments often inflict. By supplying the Council of 13 with infernal machines, Clan Skryre ensures its own position of power within the Under Empire. Each member of the Council is well aware of Skryre's value, and the clan will never allow them to forget it. New inventions and devices of war are constantly demonstrated to the Lords of Decay, and the most promising of these receiving funding from the rest of the greater and lesser clans. Many victories have been achieved by the deeds of the Warlock engineers and their lackeys, who were in turn supported by their inventions of Clan Skryre. It is for this reason that their leader, Lord Warlock Moskitar, is the second most influential member within the Council's chamber, occupying the 12th seat of the table, the one closest to that of the Horned Rat, besides that of the Grey Seers. It's been a brief overview of Clan Skryre as a kind of how they function and what they're all about. And now we will move on into their actual units that they kind of mercenary out to the other clans. Like all Skaven clans, Skryre does have its own clan rats and slaves to rely on as essentially cannon fodder, as they do not need their men to hold the line indefinitely, and in fact they only need them to slow the enemy down momentarily, as they completely rely on their infernal siege weapons and special weapon teams to carry the day. It is important to note that the clan, much like Clan Moulder, does not often go to war outright except when in dire circumstances, usually to put down a lesser clan trying to get in on their territory, or possibly quelling a rebellious underling, or one of the many Skaven civil wars having been forced to participate in. Now, usually when you see their inventions on the field of battle, it is because they have been sold almost like mercenaries to the parent clan. At a hefty price, one would probably assume. This not only keeps the clan rich, but also only subjects a few of their clan at a time to battle, and so replenishing their ranks is a far easier endeavor than that of some of the other clans. and we will start with the Warpfire Thrower, which is one of the deadliest weapons within the arsenal of Clan Skryre. A weapon so powerful and dangerous that it is considered the hallmark of Clan Skryre's ingenuity. The Warpfire Thrower is a crude yet highly volatile flamethrower that hurls a blast of concentrated warp fire upon an enemy or a small area of the ground. Warpfire throwers are almost always grouped into teams of 2 Skaven, one which would carry a bulky and highly unstable fuel tank filled with chemicals mixed with powdered warpstone, while another would aim the weapon at the enemy. With a single flick of a switch, the weapon could unleash a torrent of fuel that ignites into a greenish flame. Once the blast hits any solid object, the warpstone-imbued flame that the weapon spews forth would literally stick to almost any surface, almost like a napalm substance. Nearly nothing can douse the flames of a Warpfire thrower once it has engulfed its intended victim. However, just like any other piece of machinery that the Skaven have invented, Warpfire throwers are known throughout the Under Empire for their volatility. Being of a crude design, the weapon is legendary for misfiring or malfunctioning at an extraordinary rate, causing teams of Warpfire throwers to explode in magnificent displays of destruction that could kill the team and those Skaven foolish enough to stand near them. Now, nevertheless, the potency of the weapon often outweighs the risk it often harbors, at least in the minds of the Skaven. Now we are seeing the mighty Warpfire Thrower in Total War Warhammer. Unlike in Tabletop, where they are attached to a unit of, let's say, clan rats, the Warpfire Throwers are an entire unit of skirmishers, very similar to the Dwarf and Iron Drakes in Total War, and in fact that may not be a complete coincidence, because the Skaven, especially Clan Skryre, are known to have borrowed most of their designs from other races, especially the Dwarfs, and of course improve on them with Warpstone and the Warlock engineers' incredible overinflated ego, I mean intellect, as any good ratman has. And now the Rattling gun, which is the latest and perhaps most powerful weapon Clan Skryre has ever invented. Well, they kind of say that about every weapon, but it is a large multi-barreled death-dealing machine that has the potential to change the very face of warfare in favor of the Skaven race. Though a relatively new design and of highly questionable reliability, the Rattling gun has nonetheless proven itself so successful that Clan Skryre simply cannot make enough to satisfy the greedy needs of the warlord clans. Powered by warp steam and kicked into gear by the prodigious working of a hand crank, the 6-barreled Rattling gun could begin to spin before it unleashes its payload of warpstone bullets. As is typical of Clan Skryre work, there is a large diversity of different design patterns, including a wheeled variant, one with a small shield, a tripod-mounted version, and much more. In any case, the Rattling gun is just as equally deadly, no matter the design, but also just as likely to malfunction or overheat like any other Clan Skryre weapon. As is common amongst weapon teams, the Rattling gun requires 2 Skaven, one to hold and crank the warp steam, while another aims the actual gun forward towards the enemy. You can imagine the devastation on an enemy army a Rattling gun would have, as most races in Warhammer are probably the equivalent of, I would say, medieval era weapons and tactics, while the Skaven are capable of fielding what is essentially a steam-powered minigun to hose down troops. Now, unfortunately, we are not getting the Rattling gun in the opening roster. Though there is hope in the future, I would say it is a very iconic, and honestly, that could probably be said about nearly every missing unit that Clan Skryre has in their roster that didn't make it to Total War. But I feel like this one should definitely be in there. If it is ever added, I probably see it as only a handful of models, similar to the Trollhammer torpedoes of the Dwarfs, and with very limited mobility and probably a ridiculous damage output. It would have to be that very high risk, high reward style of play. And now on to the Poison Wind Globadiers, which are a class of Clan Skryre weapon specialists that are trained in the use of chemical warfare. The weapons of Clan Skryre are as limitless in their scope as they are dreadful in their menace. Some of the most horrifying are those that kill many enemies with only a little effort. The Poison Wind Globes are one such weapon, and they are dispensed by an elite corps called the Globadiers. The Globadiers are trained in the uses of poison, much like Eshin assassins, Unlike the adepts of Clan Eshin, however, these Skaven instead focus their training upon toxins that can kill lots of enemies at once. The vapors that swim within poison wind globes are carried on the fickle winds of the battlefield and into the lungs of the enemy, and more than likely of their allies as well. Now, poison wind globes are crafted out of glass or crystal orbs and filled with the noxious warpstone gas thereafter. When thrown, the spheres shatter, releasing billowing clouds so lethal that the mere skin contact can cause severe pain. To breathe the gases would mean imminent and painful death by means of suffocation. For this reason, Globadiers wear unique protective gear which allows them to breathe these and other poisonous fumes without ill effect. Not only do these gas masks protect the Globadiers, but they lend each one a menacing appearance. This is no doubt on purpose, as all Skaven wish their kin to fear them, and few things are more frightening than a Globadier holding a weapon that they are essentially immune to. Now, we are seeing the Poison Wind Globadiers in Total War as short-range lobbing skirmishers, whom have armor piercing to represent the poison gas that would be just as effective killing a man in full plate as it would a lowly peasant of Bretonnia. We are also getting a more elite version called the Death Globe Bombardiers. Now, I think the important part of this name is Bombardiers, and I expect that they will probably be throwing something similar to the Dwarven Satchel Charges into the ranks of enemies, probably to very devastating effect if it's anything like Dwarven Satchel Charges. Of course, they will more than likely inflict poison as well. And now we move on to the Warp Grinder, which are smaller and more portable versions of a much larger drilling machine, first devised by Clan Skryre as a means of tunneling far more quickly than a horde of slaves could ever hope to achieve. Now, some of these constructs, as I discussed earlier, are larger than entire ships in the Empire's navy. These huge devices combine great drills with warp energy to vaporize the broken debris of the machine's bores. These machines are seldom, if ever, seen, but a portable version can be found on the battlefield more often than not. The more portable Warp Grinder opens up tunnels. Projectors gleam with warp energy, pulverizing stone and leaving a narrow and smoking passageway in its wake. Small, fast-moving units can follow the device, emerging behind enemy lines to cause untold disruption. But it is a perilous trip, as the newly bored tunnels are often prone to cave-ins, and the machines can suffer catastrophic meltdowns. When the Warp Grinder breaks through the surface, it will stick with the unit it is attached to, even assisting in close combat. Without the comforting presence of a parent unit, the weapons team is more likely to flee the battlefield. Now, we will probably never see this in-game, but I do suspect that this may be the lore reason why we are getting the Dwellers Below clan rat summons on the battlefield, as with the aid of a Warp Grinder, even one not present during battle, Skaven can appear behind enemy lines and virtually anywhere on the tabletop, and it just was a perfect translation over into those Skaven units popping up anywhere on the map as you wish. And now on to the final foot-slogging weapon team of Clan Skryre in the Warplock jezzails, which are specialized teams of marksmen that bear weaponry of the same name. The weapons that they are named after are long-barreled muskets that require a team of 2 Skaven to fire and reload. This is because the rifle the marksman's team uses is extraordinary long. Aided by its tremendous length, a Warplock jezzail is capable of hitting targets at a distance greater than conventional bow or black powder firearms. Once the rifle is fired, the weapon unleashes a single bullet made up of refined toxic warpstone at such a high velocity that it strikes with a force capable of penetrating through even the thickest enemy armor. Although moving too quickly to be seen, the bullets fired by a Warplock jezzail leave behind a faint green vapor trail. This generally exposes the weapons team to enemy fire, and for this reason, what started out as mere aiming platforms for the long-barreled rifle has turned into a protective passive shield designed to shield the vulnerable jezzail team from retaliatory arrows, bolts, and bullets. The Warplock jezzail is probably my favorite Clan Skryre unit, and I'm very, very sad that they are not in the current roster. I thought for sure that they would have made the cut, as they appear to be a very easy unit to implement, as they are essentially just a heavier, longer range version of Thunderers. And in fact, in the lore, a Thunderer's rifle was actually the design from which a Warlock engineer first came up with the Warplock jezzails. Of course, you had to, polish it up with warpstone and, rub off all the filthy dwarf thing's hands from it. That only makes it better, though. They should be a shoo-in for the next DLC. And if not, I will have to rely on the modders, because I just can't play the Skaven without Warplock jezzails. I have to have them. And now we move on to more of the artillery portions of Clan Skryre, starting off with the Poison Wind Mortar, which is a form of light artillery that allows a small team of globadiers to lob a much larger payload of Poison Wind globes at a much greater range than a lone globadier could ever hope to throw. This 2 Skaven team requires one of its members to strap on a mortar upon its back, while a second Skaven would load the ammunition inside the mortar itself. Additionally, with some hasty directions, a team of Poison Wind Mortar crew has the ability to fire their weapon on the go, or fire indirectly at the enemy. Such a situation where hurting the enemy without risking their own lives has always been an appealing idea to any Skaven. When in combat, as the bulk of the firing apparatus can be strapped upon a crew member's back, the weapons team can advance and catch up alongside Skaven infantry blocks, pausing momentarily to lob high arcing shots into distant targets before scurrying forward to keep up with the rest of the army. Technically, this is a weapons team similar to the Warpfire thrower and the Rattling gun, but it functions like a long-range mortar artillery. And now that I'm thinking about it, this might in fact be the death bombardiers that we were talking about earlier, if they aren't throwing satchel charges like I previously predicted. Regardless, they are not in the roster by name at least, and I guess only time will tell if these are actually those bombardiers that we in fact were talking about earlier. Now moving on to something that is in the game, for sure. The Warp Lightning Cannon is the very pinnacle of Skaven ingenuity, a marvel of both magical and scientific engineering, crafted by the ingenious Warlock engineers of Clan Skryre. The engine of mass destruction is a machine that generates an amazing amount of energy that concentrates into a single blast of pure warp lightning. The lightning itself is generated with a reinforced sphere located at the back of the cannon, and once enough energy is charged, when fired, the Warp Lightning Cannon flings the energy through its rune-etched barrel, forged and enchanted to channel the cannon's destructive fury. When fired, the Warp Lightning Cannon emits a sizzling aura of warp energy, and anyone near the shot are rocked in its weight, fur standing on end with a sickly green light burning into their eyes. Once unleashed, the energy arcs earthwards, punching through any obstacles in its path before erupting in a cackling crowd of pure warp lightning. The shots flash too quickly to follow, but its trail, once it lands on the ground, is easily marked by a greenish vapor. Nevertheless, due to the cannon's crude design and poor manufacturing, the weapon is just as unreliable as it is powerful, having been known to blow up in a spectacular fireball should the energy within the machine not be properly contained. It is of note that the tabletop version of the Warpfire thrower Warpfire cannon, not only simply can misfire and explode, but is also known to not completely charge and deliver anything between a little tickle of damage to the awe-inspiring damage mentioned previously. It also has the chance of misfiring and pointing in a random direction, notably other friendly units, and blasting them with just sheer carnage into their back lines. Now, we are seeing this cannon in Total War, but I believe it will not have the misfire chance, but perhaps it has a very low arc, almost like an organ gun, and therefore, if you aren't careful with it, it will inflict massive friendly fire casualties. And now we move on to the last of Clan Skryre's weapons. The doomwheel is a large and massively powerful war machine that is said to sum up the sheer inhuman ingenuity of the Skaven, and most importantly, the genius of Clan Skryre. At first sight, the doomwheel might seem an oddity, perhaps even comical to opponents that have not faced one before. The dwarfs, who have suffered many wars against the Skaven, know full well that the doomwheel's measure and will direct every war machine at their disposal to blast the deadly wheel apart before it can churn close enough to pulverize the dwarf battle lines. Indeed, dwarf cannon crews have been known to allow themselves to be overrun by the foe, willingly sacrificing themselves for their hold in order to get off a single shot at the infernal Skaven device. The design is so simple and yet so complex, so utterly Skaven in its inception that it is well beyond the king of even the top minds in the Imperial School of Engineers and known to comprehend. The rats scampering around inside the doomwheel's enormous treadmills provide the primary motive power. This in turn sparks the warpstone generator, which, if all goes well, powerful bolts of lethal warp lightning. If the green or purplish bolts that arc out from the warp conduits do not slay the foe, then it will be up to the great iron reinforced wheel to crush all who dare stand before its creaking but mighty tracks. At the center of the contraption sits a Warlock engineer who pilots the mad creation. Sitting inside the mighty death-dealing artifice of destruction puffs the Warlock engineer so full of bold reassurance that the otherwise dubious courage of his race is at least partially offset. Doubtlessly, the wafting fumes from the warpstone generator bolster the engineer's confidence as well. Within Skaven military tactics, the doomwheel is the ultimate line breaker, even better than rat ogres. The rats inside the wheel are fed stimulant drugs before the battle and driven into an insane frenzy by the lightning flashing and sparking around them. As they tumble over each other, the wheel rumbles forward, but the doomwheel speed is impossible to control accurately for this reason. Sometimes it will roll along more swiftly than a galloping horse. At other times it will virtually halt because the rats are temporarily exhausted. Though it can be said that the warpstone reactor is somewhat unstable, and the speed generated by the rats is rather erratic, a series of tests using slave units as targets has yielded impressive results. Now, the Clan Skryre Warlock engineers are building this new wonder weapon as fast as ratly possible. Much to my surprise, the doomwheel is in-game, and we have even seen it used. It does have the dynamo charge, but it functions how you would expect a kind of heavily armored and powerful chariot. It is very good at breaking up formations and completely devastating skirmishers, should it be capable of pulling into the back lines, which, as we have seen, is how you're supposed to use it. And that has been it for the weapons teams and the artillery. Now we will move on to the hero of Clan Skryre, in the Warlock Engineer. We have talked quite a bit about them already, but let's go into a little more detail. The Warlock Engineer of Clan Skryre are perhaps one of the most ingenious minds within the entire Under Empire. Insane and diabolical scientists that combine arcane sorcery with mad science and engineering in a boundless pursuit to create some of the greatest technology marvels of destruction and mayhem on the face of the world. They are the artificers of Skaven society, producing many black market weaponry for any buyer able to pay for their exorbitant prices. Some amongst their numbers have even the ability to manipulate the winds of magic to destructive effect, a position that is usually reserved to only the devious Grey Seers. Many Warlock engineers consider themselves the very pinnacle of Skaven technomancy. They combine well-known weapons such as warp blades with heavy armor and highly experimental devices. Each engineer equips his own harness with the devices that he prefers. These machinations do not always function flawlessly, however, and many Warlock engineers have met their doom as a result of an exploding warp power or accumulator. Some take it a step further and augment parts of their body with cybernetic enhancements. With their goggles, harnesses that seemingly beep, whir, and click of their own accord, and the warp blades that protrude from their flesh of their arms, Warlock engineers are definitely an intimidating and horrifying sight to behold. When the clans go to war, the Warlock engineers are often amongst their numbers, either tending to the army's machinery or taking part in the action themselves. The sorcerer inventors often go to war carrying a large arsenal of weaponry, from Warplock muskets or poison wind globes of devastating potency, to blades powered by crackling warpstone energies and other assorted instruments of destruction. Individually, each Warlock engineer is capable of decimating an entire column of infantry, with their own sorcery as the assortment of weapons that they have on hand. So long as their technological components function normally, they bring terror and death to any battle or skirmish in which they participate in. Now we are seeing the Warlock engineers in-game, and in fact, we got to see one in a quest battle. They function much like they do in tabletop, as a kind of melee hybrid with access to good range as well. They are very similar to the dwarf engineers in that sense, but they also get powerful bound spells, one of them being a rocket that functions much like a one-off barrage of tiny explosions, and it seems to do decent damage against clumps of infantry. Of course, Skryre is also responsible for making other various small devices, like they pretty much have generators that produce essentially electricity to power lights around the Under Empire, as well as providing like Warplock pistols, not just the jezzails. They do a full armament. They have like muskets and all kinds of interesting things. But that about sums it up for Clan Skryre. Now there are two more units that are said to have been invented by, or possibly with, Clan Skryre, being the Plague Claw Catapult and the Screaming Bell. Now the Catapult I consider to be part of Clan Pestilence, and in fact it is in their roster despite them having worked with Clan Skryre supposedly to build it. And with the Screaming Bell, that has more to do with the Grey Seers, and therefore I'm going to cover that in a future video separate from the Clan Skryre video, and so look forward to seeing that in the near future. Now, if Clan Skryre gets the Clan Pestilence treatment and gets a full release as DLC, I would be very surprised. Kind of like if Clan Molder got one as well, I would also be surprised. But if they did, the obvious leader would definitely be Ikit Claw, the Mad Engineer. He is by far their most famous hero and definitely one of the most powerful beings in Warhammer. If he is added, I will do a separate video on him, but for now that is all I have on Clan Skryre. In a way much like Clan Molder, they embody an aspect of Skaven society, as their army is one of ingenuity, but it is completely reliant on range and is only logical for a race so cowardly as the Skaven to invest in that idea of techniques. Now, if you are new to the channel, make sure to like and subscribe, as it helps these videos be seen by more people, and for a small channel like mine, it does make quite a bit of a difference, and it will help us grow, inevitably. I have much more lore incoming soon, so keep an eye out, or snout if you are in fact a Skaven. Yes, yes. I hope you learned something today about Clan Skryre, or possibly just Skaven in general. And with that being said, I have been Jumbo Thick. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys again in the next one. Have a good day.